The white noise of the dryer was the only thing keeping me from screaming before the first hand touched my waist. It was a low rhythmic vibration that pulsed through the small of my back, a mechanical heartbeat in a room that had felt dead for a decade. Then the air shifted. I didn't have to turn around to know they were there. One moved behind me, his breath a sudden searing heat against my neck as my silk robe slid, an inch lower, guided by fingers that didn't tremble. The other stood directly in front of me, his shadow swallowing mine, eyes locked onto my face with a terrifying, silent challenge. The laundry room was a tomb of flickering fluorescent light and the cloying scent of lavender detergent. But in that moment, all I could smell was the ozone of the storm outside and the sharp, woodsy musk of men who weren't my husband. 4 hands found the curve of my hips at the exact same second. I didn't pull away. I didn't even breathe. I let my spine sink into the warmth of the machine behind me, letting the tension coil between the 3 of us until it was thick enough to choke on. They moved with a slow, agonizing patience, like they'd been rehearsing this choreography in the dark for years. Maybe they had. Maybe I had too. I'd spent 12 years convincing myself I'd forgotten what it felt, like to be wanted, but as their palms pressed against my skin, I realized I hadn't forgotten a damn thing. I had just buried it. I buried it every time I matched a pair of black socks. I buried it every time I sat through a dinner where the only conversation was the sound of forks hitting ceramic. I buried it every time I started a new load of laundry, just to have an excuse not to go into that cold, king-sized bed upstairs. This wasn't a plan. It wasn't a conscious choice. But when the door to my desire finally cracked open, I didn't try to kick it shut. I tore it off the hinges. I'm 38 years old. For 12 of those years, I've been a wife. I am the woman who remembers the dry cleaning schedule, the woman who knows the exact temperature he likes his coffee, the woman who exists in the periphery of a life someone else is living. I had become a ghost in my own hallways. People see the house, the car, and the polished marriage, but nobody has truly looked at me, the person inside the skin, in a long, long time. The first man, Kalb, is my husband's cousin. He's younger, leaner, and carries the kind of quiet, divorce-too-soon sadness that makes you want to reach out and steady him. He'd been coming around more often lately, ostensibly to help with the house, staying over when the rain made the roads back to the city treacherous. The second is Jonah, Kalb's best friend since college. Jonah is different. He's rougher, a man of jagged edges and heavy silences, with eyes that don't just look at you, they interrogate you. They'd both started showing up at the same time, a slow-motion invasion of my routine. At first it felt like a coincidence. Then it felt like a habit. Now, it felt like an inevitability. They never looked at me, like I was a piece of the furniture. They looked at me like I was the only thing in the room that mattered. That night, the sky had finally broken. A massive storm had rolled in, knocking the power out across the county and leaving the house in a thick, velvety darkness. My husband was hundreds of miles away, trapped in another business trip that had been extended by unforeseen circumstances. I was in the laundry room folding towels, by the dim light of the dryer's display, when the knocking started. Not a polite rap, but a heavy, urgent thudding. They arrived soaked to the bone, water dripping from their hair and soaking into my rug, their eyes tracing the lines of my robe in a way that made me feel like I was standing there completely exposed. I can't remember who touched me first, only that when the contact happened, my entire world narrowed down to that single point of heat. Have you ever craved something so much it felt like a physical illness, only to have the cure placed right in front of you? The dryer finished its cycle, and the room went silent. The only sound left was the ragged cadence of my own breathing and the soft metallic slide of a zipper. I was shaking, but it wasn't the cold. It was the terrifying realization that for the first time in a decade I wasn't just a background character. I was the center of a storm. "This doesn't change anything," I whispered to the dark, a lie so thin I could see right through it. Jonah's lips pressed against the sensitive skin of my throat as Kalb's fingers worked the silk belt at my waist with the focus of a man performing a sacred ritual. They weren't competing. There was no aggression, no territorial posturing. There was only a shared, silent understanding of what I needed, and I let them. I wanted it more than I wanted my next breath. I didn't care about the why or the how. I just wanted to feel the weight of them. The sudden metallic clack of the front door unlocking sliced through the moment like a guillotine. My heart stopped. Jonah stepped back instantly, his face a mask of shadows. Calb pulled his hands away as if he'd been burned, adjusting his shirt before I could even process the sound. We stood there in the dark, 3 people holding their breath, waiting for the world to end. If you've ever leaned into a fire knowing it would leave you scarred, you know exactly how heavy that silence was. Loneliness makes dangerous choices feel reasonable, doesn't it? We carry this burden together, in the secrets we keep and the lives we pretend to lead. Please, if this story resonates with the parts of you that you keep hidden, like and subscribe. It's the only way we know we're not alone in the dark. The laundry room light flickered once, a dying gasp of electricity, before plunging us back into total blackness. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs, drumming so hard I was certain it would echo down the hall and give us away. My husband didn't rush in. I heard the muffled thud of his car door, the electronic chirp of the alarm, and then his footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving toward the back entrance. By the time the knob turned, I had already tightened my robe, my fingers fumbling with the knot until it was secure. I leaned over a basket of clean laundry, pretending to search for a missing sock, with a frantic fake intensity. Jonah had vanished into the shadows of the hallway, slipping away like a ghost. Calb was hunched over the electrical panel, his voice booming with a forced casualness as he explained. He was checking the breakers. My husband stepped inside, his coat dripping a trail of rainwater across the linoleum. He kissed my cheek, a dry autopilot gesture, and asked if we were okay. I managed a nod and a smile that felt like it was made of glass. Just like that, the surface of my life smoothed over, hiding the jagged wreckage underneath. But the next morning didn't feel the same. The sun hit the kitchen tiles with a clinical brightness that made everything look fake. I went through the motions, cracking eggs, buttering toast, watching the bedsheets tumble in the dryer. My husband left for the office early, his mind already miles away on some merger or spreadsheet. I stood at the counter, pouring a cup of coffee I didn't want, and I could still feel the ghost of their hands on my skin. It wasn't just a physical memory, it was a psychological awakening. It felt like I'd been drowning, in a shallow pool for 12 years, and someone had finally pulled my head above the surface. I knew it was wrong. I knew the moral cost. But the feeling of being seen was a drug, and I was already experiencing the withdrawal. It hadn't started with that night in the laundry room. It had been a slow, insidious erosion of boundaries. Jonah would drop by after work with things my husband had forgotten: keys, a jacket, a box of hardware. He'd stand in the doorway just a second too long, his presence filling the space until I felt small. Calb had his own rhythm, fixing the things in the house that had been broken for years, staying until the shadows grew long on the grass. I never asked them to stay, but I never told them to leave. They filled the silence that my husband didn't even realize was there. There is a specific, agonizing type of loneliness that exists within a marriage. It's not the loneliness of being alone, it's the loneliness of being ignored. I had a roof over my head and a man who came home every night, but I was starving to death in a room full of food. The first real shift happened during a mundane trip to the grocery store. I was struggling with the heavy bags when Calb appeared at my car, taking the weight from my hands without a word. Jonah was right behind him. They followed me inside, and suddenly my kitchen, the heart of my domestic safety, felt small and crowded. We didn't talk. The silence was thick, pressing against our chests like a physical weight. Jonah finally broke it, his voice low and vibrating with something he wasn't saying. "You do everything yourself," he remarked, his eyes tracking the way I moved. I tried to laugh it off, a short, brittle sound. "Most women do," I replied. He didn't blink. Neither did Calb. They didn't leave right away, and I didn't want them to. Over the following week, the separate visits became joint ones. It felt like they were a tag team, a coordinated effort to remind me that I existed. It wasn't threatening, it was intoxicating. I started to watch them too. I noticed the way Jonah's shoulders filled out his shirt, the way Calb would lean in just an inch closer when I passed him a glass of water. There were moments in the pantry where the air grew so thin I thought I'd faint, a brush of fingers, a heartbeat of eye contact that lasted a second too long. They never made a move, and I never gave them a reason to. But the anticipation was becoming a physical ache. Why is it that the things we aren't supposed to want are the only things that make us feel alive? Thursday night was the turning point. My husband was gone again, a last-minute flight that I didn't even bother to question anymore. Calb was in the kitchen, wrestling with a leaky pipe, and Jonah had tagged along, ostensibly to hold the light. I made them coffee, and we ended up in the garage, sitting on old storage crates while the rain hammered against the metal roof. It was a rhythmic, hypnotic sound. Jonah looked at me, his face half hidden in the dim light. "Do you ever feel like you've just disappeared?" he asked. The question was a knife to my heart. I didn't answer, but I didn't have to. Calb reached out and placed his hand over my wrist. He didn't move it. He just left it there, a warm, heavy anchor. I didn't pull away. That was the moment I realised the good wife had already died. The woman left behind was someone I didn't recognise, and she was terrifyingly hungry. I told myself it wasn't worth the risk. I told myself I was being dramatic, but desire whispers louder than guilt when you've been in the dark for too long. I started to notice the smallest things. The way Jonah cleared his throat before he spoke to me, as if he were checking to see if he was allowed to break the silence. The way Calb would stay in the doorway after a job was done, his eyes lingering on the curve of my neck. They stopped, using words, and started using glances that felt like honey on my skin. My husband would leave, and like clockwork, they would appear. No one asked questions. No one gave answers. One afternoon, I walked into the pantry to find Jonah already there, organising the shelves I hadn't had the energy to touch. The space was tiny, cramped, and smelled of cedar and spice. He didn't move when I entered. I had to squeeze past him, our bodies brushing in, a slow, deliberate slide. I felt the heat of him through my clothes, and instead of flinching, I leaned into it. I reached for a box on the top shelf, my arm stretching past his, and he just watched me. He didn't touch me, but his hand hovered an inch from my waist, a silent promise of what was coming. I left that pantry with my heart racing and a box of cereal I didn't need, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. This was a fog, slow and rolling, and I was breathing it deep into my lungs. I started changing in ways that were invisible to everyone but them. I brushed my hair more carefully. I chose the silk robe because I knew how the light hit the fabric. I stood by the window a little longer when I heard a car. My husband became a blur, a background noise in the symphony of my own awakening. One night, Calb stayed late to fix a railing. My husband had called with the usual delayed flight excuse. I poured Calb a drink, and we sat in the living room, the silence between us vibrating with everything we weren't saying. "You ever think you could just vanish and no one would notice?" he asked the ceiling. "Every day," I whispered. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the weight of 12 years of being nothing. The next day, Jonah brought groceries. He didn't ask to come in, he just walked in. We put the milk away in a silence so heavy it felt like lead. Our arms brushed, and this time I didn't move. He looked at me, his eyes dark and unwavering. "You're allowed to want things, you know," he said. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat. "Not everything," I said. He stepped closer, his presence a physical pressure. "No, but some things." His hand